basic concepts of electricity. We have charge, current, voltage, and resistance. And in order to really get a good grasp of what electricity is, you're going to have to know these four concepts. So let's get started. Starting with charge. Charge is an intrinsic property of some types of matter like electrons and protons. They each have a charge of either plus or negative 1. So yeah, let's say that they have a charge of plus or negative 1. And the unit for charge that is most commonly used is coulombs. All right, coulombs. And a coulomb is a lot of charge. It is not a small amount of charge at all. So if we assume that, let's say an electron has a charge of -1, then a single coulomb would be equal to 6 times 10 to the 19th. 6 times 10 to the 19th electrons. A coulomb is worth 6 times 10 to the 19th electrons. So if an electron has a charge of 1, then a coulomb would be 6 times 10 to the 19th charges. Okay. So in more simple words, that's going to be 6 with 19 zeros followed after it. So it's a big number. One coulomb is a lot of charge. And that's really all you need to know as far as charge is concerned. You need to know that, well, for instance, like charges like charges repel and opposite charges attract. So these will attract. Oh, there's some errors there. These will attract, and like charges will repel. If they're like, then they will repel, and if they're opposite, then they will attract. So that is pretty much it for coulombs. Let's move on to current. So a current is going to be, it's a way to measure the rate at which charge flows. If you want a definition, like a hardcore definition, then that's what it is. It's a rate at which charge flows. So let's say that we have a wire, okay, and this is like a really zoomed in on the wire, right? And we have some positive charges. I hesitate to say protons because it doesn't necessarily have to be a proton, even though protons do carry positive charge, because a proton is only a single unit of charge. Because if you have a bunch of protons together, then that's still a positive charge, right? It's just more charge. The magnitude of the charge is now greater. So we have a bunch of positive charges flowing through this wire in a direction. Now what current would be is if we took, say, a line right here, and we measured how many times one of these charges passed this line every second, which specifically per second would be an ampere. So this is the unit that we use for current, is an ampere, or it's more commonly referred to as amps. So an ampere is, in terms of units, it's like an abbreviation for 1 coulomb per 1 second. It's 1 coulomb per 1 second. That means that if there is a coulomb of charge, which remember, it's a lot of charge. So if there's a coulomb of charge moving through this wire every 1 second, then that is 1 amp worth of charge. Or, excuse me, 1 amp of current. And let's move on to voltage. So for voltage, I'm going to do a thought experiment. So I'll do the thought experiment first, and then I'll actually move on to define voltage, just because I think that's a more intuitive way to think about it as opposed to defining it first. So let's do this thought experiment. I'm going to put it right here. So let's say we have two boxes. two boxes. This is filled with positive charges. This is filled with negative charges. Let's say that these each represent 1 coulomb of charge. So we have 1 coulomb of opposite charged boxes, and you can see here that they're separated. So over time, assuming that there are no other forces acting on these two boxes, they're going to attract because opposites attract. Opposite charges will attract. And let's say, to prevent that from happening, we attach a rope to these boxes. And right now we're assuming that there's like a wall here. We're just assuming that there's a wall that this rope is attached to. But to make the drawing a little bit simpler, I will not draw the wall. So they're separated and they're attached by a rope, so they cannot move towards each other. Now, what would happen if you allowed one of these charges to escape? So let's say this guy right here is allowed to escape. None of the other charges, just that one. So let's redraw our picture. Now this guy is free, okay? This positive charge is free. Now it's going to start moving towards this negatively charged box because it's free to do so, because these are opposite charges, they're attracting, so there's a force being exerted on them. As it moves, it is accelerating because it's a constant force, and if there's a constant force being applied, then it's going to accelerate. And it's as it accelerates, it's gaining kinetic energy. That means it's slowly speeding up and it's slowly getting faster and faster until it eventually strikes the box. And what voltage is how much energy it gains at the moment of impact. Okay? So voltage is measured in volts. It's measured in volts, and it is the unit volt is an abbreviation for joules, which is energy, joules per coulomb, which is going to be 1 joule per 1 coulomb for 1 volt, and that is going to equal 1 volt. So this is important up here. It's a little chaotic. Let me clean it up a little bit. Here we go. 1 volt is equal to 1 joule per 1 coulomb. So really, and also not only that, since like charges repel, if I once again drew this here, and let's actually put that guy back. So now there's another positive charge in play. This is not only going to be attracted by this, but it's also going to be repelled by this charge. So it's going to have a lot of energy as it's accelerating through there. So yeah, for an example, let's get rid of this guy right here. No, we're gonna make that a separate video. So now we've talked about volts. Now let's move on to resistance. So resistance is kind of like an application of all of these 3 units, and that's why I did this in the way I did, with this being 1, this being 2, this being the 3rd one, this being the 4th, is because each one kind of builds on the last one. Each one builds on the last one. And so resistance is going to be, here, let's do the same thing I did for voltage. I'm going to set up a thought experiment. So let's say we have a wire, and remember this is only a wire, but it's really zoomed in, right? So a wire is made up of matter, which is really, really dense. It is dense, it is packed full of all of these protons. And I'm going to make my wire shorter so I don't have to draw so many circles. It is just packed full of these protons, and each of these protons has electrons. And these electrons are orbiting the protons, as I'm sure you know. And in a wire like this, what is going to be generating the current is the electrons. Now, I've been using positive charges for these examples, but what really generates electricity is the electrons, and that's actually where the word electricity comes from, is electrons. So, say we, all these protons, all these atoms have one, as soon as we're talking about copper, okay, so we're talking about copper, they're going to have one free electron to move. So, there's going to be one electron, say that the tip of my marker is that electron, and say that there's a voltage applied across here. So now we have an electron that's trying to make its way through this dense jungle of protons, and it is trying to make its way to this positive charge because, as I said, the like charges are going to attract, repel. The like charges are going to repel, and opposite charges are going to attract. So, okay, this electron here, it's going to be trying to fight its way through here. But that's hard. It's not easy to fight its way through here. So as it's going along its way, now that this is the same wire, it's just I'm just doing a different illustration of the same thing. But as it's going through, this electron is colliding with each proton, or with each nucleus, I should say. So it keeps colliding with all these nuclei, and those collisions, they slow down the electron. It's not just completely free to move. They're slowing down the electron. That, and where voltage is trying to push the electron this direction, the resistance will be trying to push it back this direction. So the resistance is kind of like friction. You can kind of think about it that way. The resistivity of the metal is going to be like that. So it's going to be trying to push it in the opposite direction. And resistance is noted with ohms, or its unit is the ohm, excuse me. And that is notated with the omega sign. Now I don't know why, but it's the omega sign. And ohms is going to, in terms of units, once again, this is an abbreviation for volts per amp. So it's going to be 1 volt per 1 amp. And a good way that I've found to kind of think about this is if I put it on a graph. Now I'm going to erase this illustration. I'm going to erase all that to make some room. So say we have a graph with amps on the bottom and volts, amps on the X, volts on the Y. This is how much voltage is necessary to get an amp of current through the wire. So say we have a metal, and its graph looks like this. This is going to have a very high resistivity. It's called resistivity in metals, and it's called resistance in circuits. And there is, well, it's because resistance is intentional. We intentionally put resistance in circuits to slow down the electrons, because if there were too many electrons flowing through, then it would heat up too much. Like I said, because of the collisions, it would heat up so much that it would explode or melt, or whatever would happen. And we don't want that, so we intentionally put resistance in to make sure that does not happen. And so what I'm really talking about here is resistivity. So according to this graph, if this metal, let's say this represents like, oh gosh, what's something? Let's say wood. Let's say that this is wood. It's going to take a lot of voltage in order to get just a little bit of current through. So there's going to have to be, let's say that this is like something crazy, like 100 coulombs of charge right here and 100 coulombs of charge over here. Let's 100 coulombs, 100. That's not what I want. 100 coulombs. that's going to generate a lot of voltage. And then if it were, now there's going to be so much voltage that even something that might normally be an insulator under normal conditions might actually be able to transmit the electricity, just because the electron is, or I mean the charge is really trying to get to the other side. It really wants to go there because the voltage is just so high, because there's so much charge that's acting on it. Because remember, like charges repel, opposite charges attract. If there's a lot of charges, a lot of opposite charges, there's going to be a really strong attractive force. And it's going to be really trying to get across there, and it's going to find a path to do it. But if you have something that conducts electricity that allows for that electron to pass through it more easily, then it's going to have a slope more like this. So let's say this is copper. This means that for only a little bit of voltage is necessary in order to give it a lot of current. So let's say that, repeat this thing, but only with 1 coulomb. And there's only a single coulomb of charge. That's not anywhere close to 100, but it'll generate the same amount of current. So if we take like right here, for copper, it only takes a very small amount of voltage to reach that level of current. But for wood, it's going to take a lot of voltage to get to that same level of current. And if you'll notice, the slope, if you were to put the slope in terms of what it's being measured in, which is volts and amps, it's going to be rise over run, which is volts over amps. And this was just a good way that it kind of clicked for me. When I saw this, I was like, okay, so that makes sense, you know? A lot of voltage is going to give you a little bit of current for something with very high resistance. In other words, a very high slope. And for something with low resistance, only a little bit of voltage will give you a lot of current. And that is the essence of the 4 basic concepts. I'm going to release another video sometime soon about some examples of each of these to put it in more numerical terms, which might be helpful if you didn't completely get it from what I was talking about here. And I believe that is all. Have a good day. Hi, Miles. How do I look? The top of your head is cut off. Oh, really? Yeah. Oops. Probably just need to move the camera further back. Yeah. You're completely in frame. But the top of your head is cut off. Okay, so I need to stay in this region. Yeah, so hug the board more or less. Also, the more you hug the board, the more both of you will stay in focus. Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. So. Okay, first concept. Charge. Perfect, beautiful. Okay. A+. Just you and the camera. It's just me and you.